The Washington, D.C. UFO flap radar over the Capitol. Unidentified objects invaded restricted airspace over the White House, tracked on multiple radars, witnessed by military pilots. Late on the evening of July 19, 1952, radar operator Edward Nugent sits at his console at Washington National Airport, monitoring the glowing scope that tracks aircraft through the nighttime skies above the nation's capital. 7 blips appear on his screen. They move at approximately 100 to 130 miles per hour, a reasonable speed for aircraft of the era. Then, without warning, the objects accelerate. Nugent watches the blips streak across his scope at speeds he estimates exceed 7,000 miles per hour. No aircraft in 1952 possesses this capability. The sound barrier itself has been broken only 5 years earlier. What Nugent observes should be impossible. Senior Air Traffic Controller Harry Barnes arrives at Nugent's station. He verifies the returns. They are solid, consistent, and clearly not equipment malfunction. Barnes contacts Andrews Air Force Base, located 11 miles to the southeast. Andrews radar operators confirm they are tracking the same objects. Multiple independent radar installations are now documenting the same phenomenon simultaneously. This redundancy eliminates the possibility of isolated technical error. Barnes makes a decision. He contacts Capital Airlines Flight 807, piloted by Captain S.C. Pierman, currently airborne in the Washington area. Barnes asks Pierman to look for unusual lights corresponding to the radar tracks. Pierman scans the darkness beyond his cockpit windows. He reports seeing 6 white lights moving erratically across the Washington area. Their positions correspond precisely to the radar returns Barnes observes on his scope. The objects are not radar ghosts. They are physically present in the airspace, visible to trained pilots, and moving in ways that defy conventional explanation. The objects appear over some of the most restricted airspace in the United States. Radar tracks show them passing over the White House. They move across the Capitol building. These are not random flight paths. These are intrusions into zones where unauthorized aircraft trigger immediate military response. Yet the objects move freely, apparently unconcerned with the boundaries that govern all conventional aviation. The Air Force scrambles F-94 Staff Air interceptors from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware. The twin-engine jets are among the most advanced interceptors in the American arsenal, equipped with radar and afterburners. As the fighters approach Washington, the objects disappear from radar. Controllers watch the returns vanish as the jets enter intercept range. The F-94s find nothing. Low on fuel, they return to base. Minutes after the interceptors depart, the objects reappear on radar, resuming their movements over the Capitol. The pattern suggests awareness. The objects appear to respond to the presence of military aircraft by becoming undetectable. The incident concludes as dawn approaches. The objects fade from radar screens. Controllers file their reports. The Air Force begins its evaluation. News of the sighting leaks to the press, but coverage remains limited. The public learns little of what transpired over Washington that night. 1 week later, on the night of July 26, the objects return. Radar operators at Washington National Airport detect multiple targets moving through restricted airspace. Andrews Air Force Base confirms the returns. The episode from the previous weekend is repeating, but with greater intensity. More objects appear. More radar stations track them. The Air Force scrambles interceptors again, this time with pilots briefed on the previous encounter. Captain John McHugo leads a flight of F-94s into the Washington area. Unlike the previous weekend, McHugo achieves visual contact. He and his flight observe the objects directly before they accelerate away at speeds the jets cannot match. The objects do not simply disappear this time. They flee, demonstrating velocities that exceed any known aircraft by orders of magnitude. McHugo returns to base and files a report describing objects that outperform his interceptor in every measurable category: acceleration, speed, and maneuverability. Throughout the night, multiple radar operators track the objects simultaneously. The returns are consistent across independent systems. Whether radar operates on different frequencies and principles than air traffic control radar, yet both systems detect the same objects. The radar returns display characteristics inconsistent with weather phenomena. They perform sharp turns. They accelerate instantaneously. They reverse direction without deceleration. Temperature inversions, the atmospheric phenomenon that can occasionally produce false radar returns, create stationary echoes. They do not create returns that maneuver. Commercial airline crews report visual sightings corresponding to radar tracks. Air traffic controllers at multiple facilities observe the objects on their scopes. Military pilots attempting intercepts confirm the presence of objects that evade them with apparent ease. The documentation accumulates across multiple independent sources, each corroborating the others. This is not a case of isolated witnesses or single-source evidence. This is systematic documentation across redundant technical systems and trained observers. By dawn on July 27, the objects have again departed. The press, alerted to the second weekend of intrusions, demands answers. Newspapers across the country carry the story on their front pages. International media pick up the reports. The American public learns that unidentified objects have violated restricted airspace over the White House and Capitol building on 2 consecutive weekends, tracked on military and civilian radar, observed by pilots, and demonstrating performance capabilities that exceed known technology. The Air Force faces unprecedented public scrutiny. On July 29, 1952, Major General John Samford convenes a press conference at the Pentagon. It is the largest Air Force press conference held since World War II. Reporters pack the briefing room. Samford addresses the Washington sightings directly. He offers an explanation centered on temperature inversions, atmospheric conditions that can bend radar beams and create false returns. He suggests that the objects tracked over Washington were likely misidentified weather phenomena. Radar experts immediately recognize the inadequacy of this explanation. Temperature inversions produce stationary false echoes at fixed locations. They do not create returns that accelerate from hover to thousands of miles per hour. They do not perform sharp turns or reverse direction. They do not appear simultaneously on multiple independent radar systems operating on different frequencies. They do not correlate with visual sightings by trained pilots. The temperature inversion explanation fails to account for the documented characteristics of the Washington returns. The CIA takes notice. The Washington flap triggers concern at the highest levels of the intelligence community, not because analysts believe the objects represent extraterrestrial craft, but because public interest in unidentified aerial phenomena is growing rapidly. The agency views this interest itself as a potential national security vulnerability. An adversary could exploit public fascination with unexplained aerial phenomena to obscure genuine intelligence operations or to create confusion during a crisis. In January 1953, the CIA convenes a scientific panel chaired by physicist Howard Percy Robertson. The Robertson panel includes distinguished scientists tasked with evaluating the UFO phenomenon. However, the panel's mandate is not to investigate the nature of the objects. The mandate is to assess the national security implications of public interest in UFO reports and to recommend policies for managing that interest. The Robertson panel meets for 4 days. It reviews selected UFO cases, including the Washington flap. The panel's final report, later declassified in 1966, does not conclude that UFOs represent misidentified conventional phenomena. Instead, it recommends a public debunking campaign. The panel advises that the Air Force and intelligence agencies should monitor civilian UFO research groups, work with media to debunk sightings, and implement education campaigns designed to reduce public interest in the phenomenon. The Robertson panel represents the first documented instance of official government policy to manage public perception of unidentified aerial phenomena rather than to investigate the phenomena themselves. The Air Force's Project Blue Book continues to collect and evaluate UFO reports from civilian and military sources. However, Blue Book operates under the policy framework established by the Robertson Panel. Its function shifts from investigation to explanation. The goal becomes not to determine what the objects are, but to provide conventional explanations that reduce public concern and interest. The objects tracked over Washington in July 1952 never return. The Air Force maintains its temperature inversion explanation in official statements. The radar documentation, corroborated by multiple independent systems and visual observations, remains in the files. The press coverage fades. The public moves on to other concerns, but the Washington flap establishes a pattern that persists for decades. When credible, well-documented reports of unidentified aerial phenomena emerge, official responses focus not on investigating the phenomenon, but on managing public reaction. The policy framework created in response to the Washington sightings shapes American government handling of UFO reports through the remainder of the 20th century. The radar returns from July 1952 remain among the most technically solid documentation of unexplained aerial phenomena in the pre-video era. Multiple independent radar installations tracked the objects simultaneously. Trained observers provided visual confirmation. Military pilots attempted intercepts and reported objects with performance characteristics beyond known technology. The documentation is redundant, consistent, and specific. The location of the intrusions adds weight to the case. These were not objects observed over remote desert or ocean. These were objects moving freely through the most restricted and heavily monitored airspace in the United States. They appeared over the White House. They crossed the Capitol. They demonstrated apparent awareness of military response by disappearing when interceptors approached and reappearing when the jets departed. If an adversary power possessed such capability in 1952, the strategic implications would be catastrophic. Yet the official response was not to investigate, but to explain. Not to pursue the phenomenon, but to reduce public awareness of it. The declassified Robertson Panel report makes this explicit. The concern was not what the objects were. The concern was that public interest in them represented a vulnerability. The Washington, D.C. UFO flap of 1952 stands as the most publicly prominent UFO event in American history. It generated the largest Air Force press conference since World War II. It made front-page headlines worldwide. It prompted the CIA to convene a scientific panel whose recommendations shaped official UFO policy for 2 decades. And it provided radar documentation, corroborated across multiple independent systems and observers, of objects performing maneuvers that remain unexplained. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.